I find the best way to tackle a large task, like let's say editing a video, is to break it into smaller, more manageable pieces. From a full interview, I usually can't figure out how it's going to play best just by thinking about it all. It's too big. So I had to dig into it and find the larger concepts, then think about how those ideas will support each other and in what best order. Then once I assemble the footage into those separate concepts in that order, then I can start editing those smaller, more compact sections. It's a lot easier that way. But before putting anything into the editing software, I just got to figure out the structure. And I usually do that on paper, so I can imagine it before I start making it. We'll talk about figuring things out on paper more than a few times as we talk about editing, because it's really easy to get caught up in your footage while you're editing, and you can lose track of the story and the overall structure. Putting it down on paper helps keep you and the ideas in the video focused. I used to work with a couple of guys who would always get really excited whenever I put out my notebook to figure things out, because they knew it meant I was about to fix something. Now, we talked in the logging video about identifying those larger sections, and this is where you use that. If you haven't already, now I'll start to look at those section titles in the logs and think about how they can come together to tell a story. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. If this video is meant to introduce your organization to people who don't know it, well, you might want to start with a short "Who We Are" section, but you may want to hold that off. Let's go back and think about what we talked about with storytelling. Now, if this is a single person's interview, you might want to start with maybe a great line about just how passionate they are about your program and what it means to them. That can be our introduction to that person. That also makes us interested in the program at the same time because of their passion. So if someone says, Joe's nonprofit saved my life. Well, that's gonna make me pretty curious about Joe's nonprofit. What did they do? How did they change your life? Or maybe start with an interesting or emotional detail about their life before your program helped them. That's how so many of those music workshop videos that I made, how they began. Again, looking at the elements of a story, well, now we've just introduced the character. So now what's the problem? Something changed their life, so clearly something was missing or not as it should be, and we can start digging into that. I'll start looking at my logs for anything marked problem or challenge or however I might have labeled those sections. Next, how'd they overcome the problem? And this is where your organization will likely come in. So now I look for sections labeled how we helped or what they did or whatever I might have called that. And then the end, what's better now? So I look for the sections that tell how the organization made things better. And I'm especially looking for those final lines that make it feel complete and leave the audience with good thoughts about the organization. Not every video is going to play out just like this, of course, but it's a good way to start looking at it. So off in the middle, that's about figuring out the order, and a lot of times that's going to spell itself out for you, or not. It depends on the video, but where I always obsess is the beginning and the ending. The beginning, that's what's going to get people interested. And the ending, well, that's going to get them to want to be involved. So for the opening, I'm looking for a hook, something that makes the audience want to know more. Again, often it's introducing a character who they want to learn more about. Recently, I did a piece for a group that was looking to fund the building of a women's center. But I found out pretty late in the game that they didn't have any artist renderings or anything that I could use that could give a visual of what the space could look like. And it just made the piece feel kind of empty. If you can't picture the space, well, it's hard to get a real feel for it. Now, originally, the piece opened with the team leader telling her story, a typical opening, but because we couldn't see what she was talking about, it just didn't quite land. So I tried a few different things. I ended up making the beginning about the space and what they wanted the space to feel like. And with that, I used some stock footage of women's faces looking directly into the camera and starting to smile. Now, I couldn't show the space, but I could show people who the space might affect and how it could make them feel. It ended up working so well, I did something similar at the ending, so it made bookends that really helped the structure, because using the end to remind the audience of where the story began, it often makes a story feel complete. Now, another note about structure. I can do it in a notebook on paper now, but when you're learning about structure, using note cards or sticky notes can often help. Take each idea, each section that you want in the piece, and write it on a separate card. Then lay those cards out in front of you. Some people might put them on a cork board or the sticky notes up on a wall. Doesn't really matter, but look at them. And then you can imagine how each section might flow into the next one. And if it doesn't feel quite right to you, well, try moving things around. Like I just described, what if you start with the feeling of the space? But once you do that, well, where's the leader's backstory now go? So the note cards, they make it quick and easy to make those changes and see how they might flow with the other sections. Now, hopefully it's obvious that there's no one single structure that works for every story you might want to tell. But looking for that opening, the hook, then following that with the people, the problem, the obstacles, and finally the resolution. It's a structure that's worked for thousands of years, and once you find it in your footage, it can probably work for you.